The trap. I've been having nightmares. Vivid, unsettling nightmares that drag me back to an incident from my childhood, a memory I've tried to bury for years. I was around 10 or 11 when my parents took me on a trip to visit my dad's relatives in Minnesota. My dad's side of the family is huge, and that year, they decided on a big family camping trip. My dad's great-uncle owned a large stretch of land deep in the woods, the perfect spot for an adventure, or so we thought. The trip started out fun. I was excited to meet all the cousins and distant relatives I'd only ever heard about in passing. The other kids and I hit it off quickly, and it wasn't long before we decided to do a little exploring on our own. There were about 8 or 9 of us, all buzzing with the thrill of being out in the wilderness. We set off into the woods, bushwhacking our way through dense thickets, laughing and joking, feeling invincible. But we went deeper than we should have. By the time we realized we were lost, everything around us looked the same twisted trees, the same carpet of dead leaves underfoot. Maybe we should try to backtrack, I suggested, trying to sound calm. But as we turned back, the light was fading and panic was setting in. "I think we're going in circles," muttered Tommy, one of my younger cousins. The fear was evident in his voice, and I felt it too. The forest seemed to close in on us, and then, from somewhere in the shadows, we heard it, a spine-chilling, screeching howl that echoed through the trees. We froze, eyes wide, hearts pounding. "What was that?" whispered Jenny, the youngest of us, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we need to move. Now." Before we could react, a massive, dark shape burst through the underbrush, rushing straight toward us. It was big, dark, and covered in fur. Everyone screamed and ran. I didn't dare look back. All I could do was run, my legs burning, my breath ragged. Behind us, I heard a terrified scream, someone shouting for help. I'll never forget the terror in their voice. But fear had taken over. I kept running, and so did the others. Eventually, I heard the distant shouts of our parents. Relief washed over me as I spotted their flashlights flickering in the darkness. We all stumbled out of the woods, breathless and crying, into the arms of our worried parents. But one of us was missing. Tommy wasn't with us. "Where's Tommy?" my dad asked, his voice tight with fear. We all looked around, our hearts sinking. The adults immediately called the authorities, and a large-scale search began. But they never found Tommy, not a single trace. For over 2 decades, I pushed that memory into the dark corners of my mind. But lately, the nightmares have returned, more vivid than ever. I see Tommy's face, hear his screams. After years of embracing my spiritual side, diving deep into supernatural beliefs and practices, I began to wonder if Tommy was trying to reach me. Was his spirit calling out for help, just like he had that day? I decided to go back to Minnesota, back to those woods. I brought along my friend Becky. We arrived at the site, and the memories came flooding back. We followed what I thought was the same path we'd taken as kids, calling out for Tommy, asking his spirit to move on. Hours passed, and it started getting dark. I decided it was time to start heading back, but just then, I heard it, a faint voice calling out for help. We moved toward the sound, weaving through the trees until we saw him, a boy, standing alone in the forest. I couldn't believe my eyes. "Tommy?" I gasped. He looked exactly the same as he had 2 decades ago. "Tommy?" I called out, stepping closer. But as we approached, his expression twisted into a sinister grin. His mouth opened, and a familiar screeching howl ripped through the air. Before our eyes, Tommy began to transform, horns sprouting from his head, his limbs elongating, fur spreading across his skin. This wasn't Tommy. This was something else. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Becky's arm. We turned and sprinted, but Becky tripped and fell. I spun around to help her, but the creature was already on her, snarling. "Help me!" Becky screamed. her voice filled with panic. It was like history repeating itself, only this time, I wasn't a scared kid. I was a terrified adult. I darted through the forest, branches whipping at my face, lungs burning. I kept moving, desperate to put distance between me and whatever that thing was. But then I heard it, the creature's screeching howl. It was close, too close. I stopped, crouching down, trying to steady my breathing, listening for any sign of movement. And then I heard Becky's voice again. "This way, hurry," she called out. I didn't think, I just ran toward her voice. But when I reached her, she looked at me with a sinister grin, the same grin Tommy had worn. Her face twisted, morphing back into that monstrous form. I stand there, as still as a statue, my heart hammering in my chest. The creature advances, confident and predatory, ready to claim me as its prey. Summoning every ounce of courage, I shout, "Stop!" It halts abruptly, its body freezing in place, and I see a flicker of confusion flash in its eyes. A slow smile spreads across my face as I realize I have the upper hand. "You fell for my trap," I say, my voice steady. "Becky was never real, just a bit of meat and magic I conjured to lure you in. I've woven a spell into her, and it seems like it's finally taking hold. You, creature, are about to become the main ingredient in my next potion."
Thank you for listening to this terrifying twist tale. Please support this channel by liking and subscribing.